This episode of America Fog of War is brought to you by Civil War Trails. Civil War Trails is the world's largest open-air museum, with over 1,300 sites to explore across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg Campaign turn by turn, paddle past Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote artillery positions. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure today. I am Colby Sumner, and this is America Fog of War.
Pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, the struggle to preserve our republic. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of...
The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender.
Was found a diary. Under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again for another Hippocket History episode. As always, I am joined today by my co-host Brett Thomas. How you doing, buddy?
Good afternoon, doing very well. How about yourself?
Man, I can't complain. It's another great day to be talking about, American wars and the American warrior, and today is a first for us here on America Fog of War. We're actually getting ready to talk about our first naval battle, and I'm pretty stoked about it.
Life-changing.
You would think that I would know more about naval combat being a Marine, but unfortunately, I don't know that much about it. So any chance I get to read about it, watch videos on it, whatever the case is, it's always fascinating to me. And the battle we're going to be talking about today is even more so fascinating because it is the first time two of the most innovative creations that come out of the Civil War face off against each other. We're talking today, obviously, about the Battle of Hampton Roads, otherwise known as the Battle of the Ironclads, which that alone could be a title for one of the Game of Thrones episodes,
Yeah, it's pretty sick.
Battle of the Bastards or something. But that being said, to kind of set everybody up and explain, what Hampton Roads is and what's taking place in the country at this point, I'll give a little background and a little setup to our story here. Hampton Roads is a waterway that's right off the coast of Virginia, and it's where 3 rivers feed into the Chesapeake Bay. It's an access point from ocean to riverway, essentially, for 3 separate rivers. Those rivers are going to be the James River, I apologize for my pronunciation of this, but the Nansemond River and the Elizabeth River.
I like how you said that. Sounds great.
I hope it's correct. We'll see. But all 3 feed into the Chesapeake Bay there. The James River is extremely important because it provides a direct water route between Richmond in the Chesapeake Bay. The Union know that if they can control that area, they could lead a combined Army-Navy attack, essentially, on Richmond and end the war very quickly.
Yeah, they just cut the whole Confederate capital, cut it out of the picture.
Right, and not to mention with what ease they could do that with. If they took any example from U.S. Grant over in the Western Theater at this point, he's just done that with 2 major, big deals in Forts Henry and Fort Donelson. So they know this. The Confederates also know that they can't allow that to happen. The Confederacy has many, many, many obstacles to overcome as far as their Navy goes. I talk about this as well in one of our narrative episodes, but just to kind of recap really quick, most of the ship building and ship repair facilities are in the North. When I say most of them, I think it's something like 85-90% of them are in the North. Most people that work any kind of nautical career whatsoever, whether that's fishermen, tugboat captain, whatever the case is, most people that work a nautical job live in the North. The South, at the start of the war, is incredibly behind in their capability to not only build and supply a Navy, but then man that Navy. So, that being said, they have to think of pretty creative ways to overcome the obstacle of facing off against one of the greatest navies in the world.
That they do.
One thing going for them is at the start of this war, right after Fort Sumter happens, there's going to be a naval yard at Norfolk, Virginia. And this naval yard is going to be attacked by a pretty large formation of Virginia militia. The Union troops that are there before this Virginia militia take it over are going to try to destroy pretty much everything that's there on the base that the Confederates could possibly use in the future against the Union. They're hurried, though. There's not very much time they have between when they find out and when they get the order to destroy all the equipment and then when the Confederates show up. So unfortunately, they don't do a very good job of destroying everything they aimed to take out of Confederate hands. They were spiking cannons, sinking ships, burning supplies. Pretty much everything that was on that base eventually, though, is salvaged by the Confederacy and put into action. One of those things is the USS Merrimack. Tell us about the USS Merrimack and what happens to her, Tommy.
All right. Well, a little history about the Merrimack first. It's a 40-gun frigate, and it was launched in 1855. The Merrimack served in the Caribbean and also became the flagship of the Pacific Fleet later in the 1850s. But by 1860, the ship was decommissioned for extensive repairs at the Gosport Navy Yard in Norfolk, Virginia, and that's where the ship would stay. 6 weeks after the Confederates are controlling the Navy Yard, a salvage company comes in and they raised the Merrimack from the dead. The Confederates restored the Merrimack and covered that wooden ship with heavy armor plating. And later, they renamed it from the USS Merrimack to the CSS Virginia.
It's funny that, you don't think about it, but they changed the USS to CSS. It's interesting to me. One of those little things, you probably don't ever pay attention to, and probably makes all the sense in the world, but still, I think it's kind of cool you see these little changes.
Got to make it your own, too. It even earned itself a nickname. It was nicknamed the Floating Barn Roof.
Well, I could see that. If anybody's ever seen a picture of the USS Merrimack, well, I'm sorry, I stand corrected, the CSS Virginia.
Right.
It does look exactly like that. The top of this thing is like an A-frame barn, essentially, and I don't know exactly how far it stretches, but it almost looks like a fin coming out of the water, like a really elongated fin.
Yeah, this thing is kind of a monster. There's some advantages and some disadvantages, but the draft of the ship is 22 feet, and what that means is that the bottom of the ship goes 22 feet into the water, so anything less than that, it'll ground the ship.
They can't drive the boat. They can't take the boat into water more shallow than that.
Right. Yeah, it can't go any more shallow than 22 feet. And that's going to be later a disadvantage for this ship. But in any case, because it's so big, it's probably required. But, the length of the ship, 262 feet. The beam, which is how wide it is, 51 feet. And the displacement is 3,200 tons.
That's how heavy that joker is.
Heavy.
That's a big old thing, man.
Heavy, but it's moving at a good pace, 5 to 6 knots for something like that, and something like that's never been seen before. So it's moving pretty good.
Right, and I would assume that it has some advantages in this whole thing as well.
Yeah, the advantage is the armament. This ship is just the wooden part is really below or right at the waterline, and the armor coming up like a barn roof is above the waterline. Now, this thing is going to be equipped with 10 powerful guns facing in every direction.
Right. Well, I want to say they have 4 on one side, 4 on the other, and then 1 on each end, right?
Yeah. So these are going to consist of 6 9-inch Dahlgren smoothbore cannons, and the 2 on the front and back, they're going to be 7-inch Brook rifles, forward and rear facing. And then also, in addition, there's going to be 2 6.4-inch Brook rifles as well.
That's for all the gun nuts out there, all the guys that want all the deets on the cannons.
All the deets on the cannons. There it is.
Well, awesome, man. Well, so tell me a little bit more about the ship. They have a crew of 320 guys, right?
Yeah, that's pretty big. But they're not going to go in with that. They're going to go in with about 250 to 260. And actually, I have a quote here. The surgeon on the Virginia, his name's Dinwiddie Phillips. And he said, most of our crew being volunteers from the Army and unused to ship life, about 20% of our men were usually ashore at the hospital, and our effective force on the 8th of March was about 250 or 260 men.
So they're capable of having much more than what they have on board, but at the same time, I think about this, man. We just got the dimensions of that ship, and it's not that big. 292 feet long?
Right. About there, yeah.
50-something feet wide, not that wide, and it has a depth, like its hull goes down 22 feet, and you're going to have 260 dudes on board. Man. I can only imagine. I mean, I know you've been on a naval ship before. You went up to New York for Fleet Week. You guys sailed out of Norfolk.
Yep, took a bus up to Norfolk and jumped on the USS Iwo Jima.
One of the guests on our debrief, Ben, we text every once in a while, and he was telling me the other day that his dad was on the first Iwo Jima.
Oh, okay. First Iwo. Well, then that. Maybe I was on the second one too, because this one was commissioned, I remember, in 2001.
Yeah.
And but even with a ship, of course, it's not the biggest ship, but this one's
It's
bigger.
a modern
bigger.
naval ship. It's pretty big.
It's pretty big, but there's not a lot of room because the berthing areas, you really are jammed in there like sardines, and the racks go so 5 high sometimes or more. And just walking down the hallway, like every so often, there's like a hatch you got to duck. Like it's big, but it's not.
Yeah, well, that's what I heard. That's what I've heard from everyone. So I can only imagine how cramped it was inside the CSS Virginia, but also I can't begin to imagine what it smelled like inside of the CSS Virginia. The tight quarters like that and that many dudes, and it's, whew.
Yeah, that's what a bunch of Marines smell like in the berthing at the end of the day. Oh boy.
Yeah, if you get, now imagine having that without any kind of air conditioning whatsoever, or just out in it, man.
Right.
Just loving those natural scents.
Probably a good time to be an officer. And speaking of that, we have the captain, the ship's commander, Captain Franklin Buchanan. He's got an impressive career. He joins the Navy in 1815. He quickly rises to the rank of captain in 1855. He was named the first superintendent of the United States Naval Academy, and he also served during the Mexican-American War. He was made the commandant of the Washington Navy Yard in 1859, and when the Civil War broke out, he quickly resigned his commission, gave up his post, and took a position with the Confederate Navy.
That's quite a career. The first commandant of the Naval Academy. I mean, the guy's pretty decorated, but like a lot of people from the South at the time, he decided his loyalties lay with his state.
Right. Take his experience and go elsewhere or wherever he deems it to be better for him, I suppose. So set the stage for us, day one.
So we're at March 8th now, 1862. By this point, the Union has been blockading the South for almost a year.
Well done, gents.
Very effectively, too. Yep, raw for them.
Yeah.
That being said, part of those efforts were the Union had a string of quite a few combined land and sea operations where they captured a ton of coastal defenses and coastal forts and all kind of coastal entryways along the Confederate coastline there. One of those happens to be Fort Monroe. And at this time, currently in our story, the Union occupy Fort Monroe. General McClellan, in charge of the Army of the Potomac, they're getting ready to launch his Peninsula campaign.
Okay.
And it's going to be launched from there. They know that as long as they control that, as long as they control Fort Monroe, they control the entrance to Hampton Roads. This is a huge deal because at Hampton Roads, like we had talked about earlier, you control that, you control supplies coming in and out through Richmond, essentially. And to strengthen their hold, the Union Navy has not only placed guys there to garrison Fort Monroe, they've got an infantry detachment over there as well, but they've also stationed some of their more powerful warships in Hampton Roads as well to counter an attempt by the Confederates at least to seize control of Fort Monroe back. Now, on the other side of Hampton Roads, the Confederacy controls Norfolk and its Navy Yard in Portsmouth. In an effort to kind of secure what they have and prevent Union forces from coming over and harassing the little navy they have, or God forbid them coming across and capturing more Confederate territory, the Confederacy is going to place batteries up and down the coastline, specifically at the junction of the Elizabeth and James Rivers. Now, Confederate Secretary Stephen Mallory, he knows that at this point in the war, we got to do something about this blockade. We've been blocked in now for almost a year. We're feeling it, right? We're feeling the repercussions of that. There's no imports, there's no exports, there's no money being generated from any of that. So it's not just affecting what they can receive as an import, but it's affecting their capabilities at building and innovating new gear and equipment and tools of war to be able to implement in their fight against the Union. Right. He also knows that he needs a little bit of a morale boost for the citizens of the South. Nowadays, it's easy to look back at the Civil War and just kind of judge the feeling of your everyday person, your civilian during this time based on the major battles and how those have turned out. The Confederacy has won First Manassas, but by this point, it's been a while ago. And there's been some pretty big losses that they've experienced in the Western Theater. Things are going great for the Confederacy in the Eastern Theater, but outside of that, they're not doing too hot. In the Western Theater, they just got destroyed by Ulysses S. Grant at Forts Henry and Donelson. And he also now controls a vital entryway into two of the most prominent rivers in the Western Theater. So things aren't going well for them there. And there's a few other places as well where they've suffered defeats. So he knows he needs a little bit of a morale boost, get the public behind him, and hopefully at the same time put a dent in the northern populace's will to fight. That's one of the major goals of the Confederacy in this war, is to, just like the Revolutionary Patriots and many other people throughout history, have tried to either outlast or beat out of their much stronger opponent the will to fight.
Right.
And they do that through the civilian population. So, that being said, the Confederate Secretary Stephen Mallory tells Captain Buchanan to sail up the Potomac as far as Washington, D.C. because, hey, man, it's going to boost morale. This is going to be big for us. And at the same time, probably freak out a lot of Northerners and make them think twice about keeping this war going.
Right, because right now it's mainly been fought in the South.
Exactly. Do you love America Fog of War and want more of it? If so, Brett and I would love it if you became a member of the America Fog of War Patreon. Visit americafogofwar.com and follow the link Become a Member located in the menu at the top of the homepage and pick from one of our 3 membership subscription options. As a member, you can enjoy ad-free early access to all of our free episodes, like this one, as well as gain access to not 1, but 2 extra episodes a month. Your membership subscriptions are what enable us to bring you the content you love every month. Help us grow this podcast and become part of the team today at americafogofwar.com. So Buchanan, he loves the idea. He gets right on board, and he decides he wants to attack this coastal point there in Hampton Roads called Newport News Point. And his goal initially is to do it as a combined land and sea operation. There's also a Confederate army in the area near Fort Monroe and Newport News Point. It's called the Army of the Peninsula. And for whatever reason, he cannot get the commander of that army to commit to this plan, this combined land and sea attack against Newport News.
A shame.
Well, sometimes that happens. And I don't really know the reason why. The commander of the Army of the Peninsula might have had very good reason not to. But I just don't know it for this purpose.
Yeah.
That being said, Buchanan's a fighting guy, so Captain Buchanan and the CSS Virginia moved to attack Newport News Point without the Army in support.
I'm going to do it myself.
Right, exactly. If you want something done right, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So they're off into action. The CSS Virginia is on its way to have its first engagement as a war vessel. And waiting there for them are 2 Union warships, and they are prominent warships, some of the most powerful ones that the Union has. But unlike the CSS Virginia, these guys are of the older type of ship, the wooden ship, right? Something more akin to what you would see in Pirates of the Caribbean. So even though they're much larger with far more guns, they're set for a collision course with a disaster.
And they got the short end on this one. They have no idea what's coming.
Exactly. So these 2 ships, it's the USS Cumberland and the USS Congress. They're there waiting for the CSS Virginia. The Virginia's first target is going to be the Cumberland, and at around 2 p.m., the Virginia fires on the Cumberland on the CSS Virginia. You have 4 guns on either side of it, 1 gun facing forward, 1 gun facing the rear, and this forward-facing gun is the one that takes the first shot. After they fire, both Union ships are going to return fire, which would have been a massive volley of cannon fire. I mean, there's a ton of guns on these ships, but unfortunately for the Union guys, they fired those rounds, watched them fly through the air, and then watched them bounce off of the CSS Virginia like throwing a pebble against a wall. I mean, it's hitting it and bouncing right off. It's not doing anything.
Not a good feeling for these guys.
You talk about the biggest demoralizing event that could probably take place at the onset of a battle. I don't know if there's one much worse than that.
Immediate.
Just, okay, well, what do we do now?
Well, you got to accept this
right.
real fast.
So they're continuing to fire, but not really having any success. And the Virginia continues to get closer and closer to the Cumberland. Once it gets within a certain distance, it decides that it's going to use its secret weapon.
Oh, the secret weapon time.
Yeah, and this secret weapon is below the waterline. It's a 1,500-pound iron ram on the front of this ship.
Nice.
I mean, it's something like you would see on a Greek trireme, like one of these ancient warships from the days of swords and bows and arrows, right?
Yeah.
Ancient naval warfare.
They just don't get away from the basics. Sometimes you got to smash the basics.
And you kind of see like a little bit of this in other wars as well, but you'll have a massive step forward in technological capabilities and innovations as far as the tools of combat, the instruments of warfare. But then you'll also have a big step backwards in the tactics, because these guys are still trying to figure out how to use these things properly.
Right.
So in that, very much in line with that, these guys ram the Cumberland, and it's devastating. They strike the Cumberland on its starboard bow.
So that's like the front right.
Right. If you're on the ship and you're facing the front of the ship, it'd be on the front right-hand side, right? that section of the ship. And it's going to kill quite a few guys right off the bat, just the ramming process itself.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing about this is it's pretty much a kill stroke for the Cumberland, but at the same time, even though it's so effective for the CSS Virginia, it almost sinks the Virginia too. They're stuck.
Some
guys got in there, but they can't get out.
Yeah, okay.
The forces of nature and gravity and everything else have taken away their avenue of egress. They're stuck for the time being. You know?
Time and time again, that's a bad move when you're in that situation.
Yes, it is. The Virginia will, after trying a few different things, become clear again of their adversary there. They're actually going to break the ram off still inside the Cumberland.
Nice.
So I was watching a video, if you guys have never looked him up, his channel is called Warhawk, I believe.
He's great.
He does animated battle maps. And honestly, as a tool to help you in your research, I think it's phenomenal because you get to visualize what's going on. Over a time lapse, he's playing out the battle as it goes. It's good videos. We'll put a link for it in the show notes. But that being said, on one of his episodes, he's talking about Hampton Roads, and he's explaining this point in the story. And he quotes one of the Confederate sailors on board the CSS Virginia. And they say something to the effect of, the ram is kind of like a wasp stinger. Right? It's great. It's very effective. But the minute you use it on somebody, that's the only time you can, because it breaks off and stays inside of whoever you've decided to sting. I just thought that was a pretty good visualization of what this ram was like. Now, the Union sailors are exemplifying quite a bit of bravery in this fight. They know they're doomed. They know their ship's going down. There's no chance they're going to win this fight, but they keep trying to do what they can. Now, obviously, seeing their rounds bounce off the side of the Virginia time and time again, the Union guys decide, hey, we can't keep shooting at the side of this thing and think it's going to work. So they aim for the gun ports of the Virginia, those doors that are open that the cannons slide through to be able to fire out of. On the Virginia, they're pretty wide. So these Union guys, they're like, man, let's aim for that. Let's see if we can just sneak one through one of the holes, maybe.
Yeah.
And they have some success. They do damage the Virginia a little bit, but unfortunately, they don't do enough damage. The Cumberland goes down to the bottom with her colors flying. She will sink. And she'll take with her 121 Union sailors. So a pretty devastating experience for the Cumberland and its crew. But that's just the first of two adversaries for the Virginia. What happens to the next one?
So yeah, with the Cumberland out of action, the CSS Virginia is going to take on the Congress. And the Congress saw this and fired upon the ship and with no effect, and decides they're going to get moving farther away, get some distance. And
right, this is not going to work out for us. We've tried to fire on them.
Right.
The Cumberland tried to fire on them and then sank. So let's live to fight another day.
Right. Well, they don't. They run. They get stuck in the ground. They run into shallow waters. They get stuck. And the Virginia now comes up there, gets right alongside, and roadhouses this thing.
Just raking fire all the way down her.
All the guns firing on that side of the ship and lights it on fire, and it's pretty bad.
They call that hot shot, right? When they're flammable rounds. I'm pretty sure that's what they were calling them in the accounts that I was reading of this. Man, that'd be terrifying. It'd be terrible.
Yeah, it's terrible. You're just stuck, and now you're on fire. So, but what can you do? So around 4 p.m., the Congress is going to signal their surrender. So they're giving it up. Now, Buchanan, he's going to look at this as a prize, and he's going to come up on deck. Him and some other men are going to come up. They're going to observe the surrender. However, the Union infantry ashore
had other plans for them.
Yeah. They're going to ruin the ceremony because they don't care about a ceremony, and they're going to fire upon the Virginia from the shoreline, and Buchanan's actually going to be wounded in this event.
Yeah, here's your surrender ceremony.
Right. Yeah, thanks, infantry.
Infantry keeping the fight going, man. You got to love that.
Right. So, of course, he's brought below decks. Now, the reason why this event happened is because ever since the age of sail, it's been customary to surrender the ship and accept surrender or whatever it may be as a prize or not.
There's a gentlemanly quality to it.
Yeah, a gentlemanly quality, like it's a classic thing. And this time...
These volunteer infantry guys are like, nah, bump that gentlemanly stuff, man. We're in a fight.
Right, yeah. They didn't care about these officers or men, and I think because maybe really nobody could fire when they're firing upon this thing. Nobody can do anything. Everything's bouncing off of it.
Right.
So now it's like, well, here's a target of opportunity. The infantry's going to take it. So as darkness approaches, the Virginia's going to return back to her side, and the captain requiring medical attention's got to be unloaded off the ship and treated properly. And command of that ship is also going to change hands as well to his executive officer, if you will.
Yep. Always be prepared for that if you're joining the military. That's any branch, man. At any moment, you could be asked to do the job of your superior. So you want to make sure you know that. And then for you guys that are in leadership positions, you got to make sure the guys below you know how to do your job, because that's a very real world thing that happens all the time in warfare.
Yep. Got to be cross-trained. You got to know a little bit about everything and maybe a lot about something. But I think with their success that day, he's probably thinking, yeah, I'll do the same thing tomorrow.
Right. Easy day in the office, man. We just wrecked over there. Now, although the Confederates have had a very successful time fighting Union forces in Hampton Roads on the 8th, the next day is not going to go that way for them. That's because the Union has taken steps to ensure that doesn't happen. They've also built their own ironclad, and 3 days before this battle takes place, it has set sail from New York, heading straight for Hampton Roads.
She's coming down.
Exactly. So this ship is called the USS Monitor, and it's designed by a Swedish-American engineer by the name of John Ericsson. This dude is brilliant. I mean, just looking at what he does with this ship is case enough for that. I mean, he doesn't need much more proof than what I'm getting ready to tell. But to give you an idea of how advanced this ship is going to have 33 patents issued to it, right? So things that he has created specifically for this ship. And they're versatile enough and useful enough that he decides he needs to get a patent. There's also 100 more patentable designs in this ship that didn't get granted patents.
That's incredible what they can come up with and do during wartime that just out of nowhere just happens.
It's fascinating. And just the imagination on people like this, like that's like an Elon Musk move. You know what I mean? Like it's just creative in a way that I will never be creative in that way. You know what I mean? But that being said, obviously Ericsson was. Now, the ship is actually going to be built in 101 days, and it's going to be commissioned into action on February 25th of 1862. It's going to be a little smaller than the Virginia. It's going to have a length of 173 feet. It's going to have a width of 41.5 feet, and a very unusual look. It's got a very low profile. Only about 18 inches of ship come above the water level.
That's real slick.
Yeah. It's kind of cool. I mean, it's pretty high speed when you consider the time this is being built in. And the deck is going to be long and flat, right? So that 18 inches is the same all the way across the length of this ship, with the exception of two spots. The first being the pilot house, which is somewhere between the center of the ship and the front of the ship. And it comes up a few feet. It's got a little eye slit in it, so the pilot of the ship can see out, the commander of the ship can see out. Okay. And then it's going to have right smack dab in the center of the deck a turret. All right, and this turret is huge. It's about 20 feet tall, and it's going to house 2 cannons. Now, unlike the Virginia that needed 10 guns to be able to cover every direction it could possibly need to fire in, the Monitor only needs those 2 cannons because that turret can rotate a full 360 degrees, and it can do so in 24 seconds.
That's fast.
I mean, dude, we're talking about a time, I mentioned this in another episode, but we're talking about a time where the horse is still the main method of transportation.
Right.
And you've got fully iron ships that can rotate a turret 360 degrees in a super short amount of time and have effective fire in any direction they need to.
And it's super low in the water, so talk
super
about
low, hard target.
Hard target. You
right?
took the words right out of my mouth.
Right, hard target. And the weight, right? The weight of the ship is gonna be a plus because of this, because they don't have all the extra guns and all the extra ammunition and powder and everything that they would need for those guns. They can dedicate it just to 2 guns. You have this massive turret coming out of this pretty flat ship. And to give you an idea of what it would look like, there was some guys during this period in time, if they saw the ship, would say basically that it was a cheese box on a raft, like this flat raft with one of those old what are they? The waxed cheese boxes. Yeah. So just to give you an idea, it's a pretty unusual looking ship.
Never seen before.
Now, for those gun nuts out there, the 2 cannon inside that turret are going to be 2 11-inch Dahlgren guns. For those of you that just like to know that there's cannon in there, don't worry about the nomenclature. Yeah. Just for the deep divers, but some people really love that kind of stuff.
That's all you need.
Figured we'd throw it in there. Now, the Monitor also has some major advantages over the Virginia besides its 360-degree rotating turret. The biggest one, in my opinion, is going to be its draft. We talked about how deep the hull goes before, you've reached the bottom of the boat. Now, on the Virginia, that was 22 feet.
Yep.
On this ship, on the Monitor, it's 11 feet. So they can get into much more shallow water. They can maneuver easier. They can get away if they need to get away. There's a lot more options that open up themselves to be taken advantage of by the Monitor than there is for the Virginia. Now, just to tell you a little bit more about the ship, it's going to have 4-inch iron armor. It's going to weigh about 987 tons. It's going to have a max speed of 6 knots, and it's going to take considerably less amount of people to man this ship, to operate this ship. We were talking about there being somewhere around 260 guys on the Virginia during this engagement. Well, the Monitor is only going to have 49 guys on board.
Not bad.
So again, you can fit more. So there's a lot of things that come up, but in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, less guys, you can fit you can fit a ton of supplies. Those supplies will last longer because they're going to less guys. Just like the rounds will last longer because they're going to fewer cannon. So this ship could actually maintain fire with the enemy for longer or stay out on the water longer, ideally, than the Virginia can. Just a few other little advantages it has over its Confederate counterpart. It's no secret that Brett and I have been friends since we were 18 and in the first year of our enlistments. Well, a few years ago, we decided that we needed to see each other with more consistency than we had been up to that point. But it would have to be a trip of some kind because we lived on opposite ends of the country. For us, there was no better way to spend our time together than being out on one of the many battlefields all across the country. We would take 2 trips a year, each of them just for a few days, and go park the car, get out, and walk a battlefield like Antietam or Gettysburg. And we'd have a blast. It's on one of those trips we decided to start America Fog of War. Walking America's battlefields in the footsteps of the men that fought the battle is the best way to learn the legacy of the American warrior and to really appreciate the sacrifices they made. Brett and I both still do it, and although it's usually for researching the subject matter of our show these days, it's still fun. If you're interested in following the Army of Northern Virginia's invasion into Maryland, or its retreat after the defeat at Gettysburg, or Grant's 1864 Overland Campaign, then I highly recommend checking out Civil War Trails. I've been a fan of Civil War Trails and what they do since Brett and myself started doing these battlefield trips all those years ago. They're an awesome organization. They make historical interpretation of the American warrior's legacy easier to access and enjoy for everyone. If you'd like more information on Civil War Trails and what they do and all the different sites that they have for you to explore, then go check out civilwartrails.org. Find a battlefield or a site that you want to visit and stand in the footsteps of the men and women that made this country what it is today. Now, placed in charge of the ship is going to be Lieutenant John Worden. So just to tell you a little bit about Worden, he's had a very successful career in the Navy, and I won't go too into detail, but he's a Mexican-American war veteran. He served on, the west coast of the country. He served in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean. And at the start of the Civil War, he is sent with secret dispatches to Florida. He's sailing down there in efforts to get these dispatches to the commander of Fort Pickens. Okay. Fort Pickens is one of the other forts still under Union control other than Fort Sumter. It doesn't get as much attention as Fort Sumter does, probably because there's not a massive attack that's, right in everybody's front yard.
Right.
But that being said, the commander down there is holding out. He's doing a good job, and Worden gets word that he should be going down there. While attempting to return to the north, Worden's captured, and he's a prisoner of war. Now, by the time we get to where we are here in this story, he's been exchanged. Back in the early days of this war, they would exchange prisoners, right? Prisoner exchanges. So we give you back a few of your prisoners, you give us back a few of ours, and that's that. So here Worden is. He's in command of this ship now. He goes to New York to oversee the completion of the Monitor. And after some setbacks, he gets the word to man the ship. Let's get this ship out in the water. Let's get down to Hampton Roads. We got some work to do. And at around 2 a.m. on March 9th, they arrive at Hampton Roads. So the next day's fight, it's going to be a little more evenly matched. Now, Worden is going to get in touch with the commander of the USS Minnesota. The USS Minnesota, like we had talked about earlier, is the one that gets beached a little bit. Like it's stuck. It can't move, and it's really taken a beating. And they've been trying all night to get this thing out of there, but they're not having any luck with that. So Worden, freshly to the scene, he's in this ironclad that everybody thinks looks ridiculous, this little cheese box popping out of the water. And he says to the captain of the Minnesota, quote, "I will stand by you to the last if I can help you."
That's powerful.
Right? So
that's something.
Right off the bat, Worden is letting it be known, I'm here for the fight, man. I'm not here for the headlines in the newspapers. I'm not here just because I wanted to drive a cool new ship. I'm here to use this ship. I can't guarantee your safety, but just know I'll fight until I cannot, until we sink if we have to. Pretty awesome quality exhibited there when we're talking about leadership and what the right thing is to do in combat.
Yeah. Getting back into the action, the CSS Virginia is going to make another approach that morning at 8:45 a.m. She's going to be moving towards the Minnesota, who's currently stranded, as we know.
Stuck, man. Just stuck in the mud.
Beached, yeah. And during this approach in the opening engagement, Lieutenant Jones, who we said earlier was the XO, and he's now in command of this vessel, he's going to notice a small raft-like vessel approach his ship and move between the Minnesota and the Virginia, because this ship being so low to the water, just only 18 inches above, and it's never been seen before, they were actually camped out behind the Minnesota in a way. So once the approach began and they made this move, it really did come out of nowhere, and it really had to be noticed. So the Monitor is now the aggressor, and the Virginia, with such a successful day yesterday, is now targeted.
Right. Put into prey status.
Right. Yes, exactly. So the Confederate Ironclad has to now shift its firepower to this Ironclad approaching, and it's going to be a totally different fight now because the Minnesota's now been spared. Now, the two Ironclads, they're going to just settle down, and they're going to have at it, close range. It's going to be a slugfest.
Yeah,
just blow for blow.
What's the distance on that? I read somewhere the distance, and I don't want to misquote it, but I believe it was a super short distance.
Right. Less than 100 yards.
Yeah, less than 100 yards, which is nuts. Also, I'd be scared of the rounds bouncing off of both those ships. You know what I mean? Like, where do they go when they bounce?
Right.
It's a big freaking cannonball flying through the air, a ricochet cannonball.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. They're just trading blows, blow for blow, and it's just glancing off of each other's armor. It's quite a show, so much so that General Joseph K. Mansfield, he's a commanding officer of the coastal batteries overlooking the battle. Now, think of it this way. He's an Army guy. All right?
Yeah.
Now, we have our rivalries between our branches and our competitions or whatever, but here's an example of an Army guy of the coastal batteries cheering on the U.S. Navy. And he says, quote, "At one shot from the Monitor, he would exclaim, 'Damned it, you're firing too high.' Or to the Merrimack when it engaged the Monitor, 'You cussed rebel, you didn't hurt us a bit.'"
See, man, I try to, it's fun to embrace the rivalry. I used to talk, my dad was in the Army, and I would talk crap with him all the time. But it's all out of good fun, and I think most people know that, but maybe some people don't. And when push comes to shove, and you're downrange, and it's you're in a combat zone, and war is on, they're on your team, and you're rooting for them.
Brothers in arms.
When they're doing good, you're like, heck yeah, bro, get it.
Sisters in arms. That's right. Everything.
So that's interesting. Mansfield, he's an interesting character. He'll come up in our story later this season. But he seems like he really wanted to be part of some fighting, man.
Yeah, well, he was focused on it. And like anything, I'm sure this is something that you really had to be there to see it, to actually really know. But anyway, it gets a little bit more interesting when you talk about the close range, because the Virginia is going to try to ram the Monitor without a ram on it. It's just going to try and
run into
smash it. But the shifty Union vessel is going to outmaneuver the Virginia. Now, I like this part because I have quotes from each side, and they're both a little bit different. So here's a quote from part of a letter written by Lieutenant Jones, who's the XO on the Virginia, and this is what he wrote about while in action against the Monitor. Quote, "We once succeeded in running into her and twice silenced her fire." End quote. Now, the account from the Monitor, it's similar, but it's going to be in much better detail. I like this one better. This is going to be from a letter written to Captain John Erickson. He's the guy that designed the boat you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
This is a letter that was written to him. And it's going to be by Chief Engineer Steimers, and he describes the Monitor's great ability to combat this Confederate Ironclad. And he says, quote, "She tried to run us down and sink us as she did the Cumberland yesterday, but she got the worst of it. Her bow passed over our deck, and our sharp upper edged side cut through the light iron shoe upon her stem and well into her oak. She will not try that again. She gave us a tremendous thump, but did not injure us in the least. We are just able to find the point of contact." End quote. So after several hours of the close combat, Captain Worden, he's standing in the pilot house of the Monitor, and he's going to be temporarily blinded when a shell from the Virginia explodes right by that house.
Yikes.
Yeah, it's going to come through and just blind him.
That's not what you want.
No. But at this point in time, the Monitor is actually going to disengage, and it's going to head for more shallow waters for multiple reasons.
They've had a problem up to this point. Didn't something happen to the turret where it was just spinning? They couldn't control where it stopped?
Yeah. certain things were out of control. I don't have that. I read that.
I pictured this turret, like the monitor's out there doing its thing, and the turret is just nonstop spinning, and they're like waiting for it to get on target so they can fire it,
Right.
As silly as that sounds, that kind of crap happens all the time fighting, man. Like there'll be silly things that are happening, but they start working, so you just take advantage of them, or you're making the best situation you can out of what you got.
As long as it's moving.
All right. As long as it's still firing.
Yeah. If it's disabled, then you got a problem. But anyway, ultimately, after 4 hours of engagement, they're going to both make a full withdrawal. Confederate Lieutenant John Eggleston, he's going to be aboard the Virginia. When asked why his gun crews had stopped firing at the Monitor, he stated, quote, "After 2 hours of incessant firing, I find that I can do her," the Monitor, "about as much damage by snapping my thumbs at her every 2 minutes and a half," end quote. So clearly,
that's pretty good.
Everybody involved seems to be, at this point, probably a bit agitated that you can't get through.
Well, nothing's happening, man.
Nothing's happening. It's just a waste of stuff because these ironclads are just monsters in the ocean now.
Well, they are, and let's talk about that because, at the conclusion of this battle, as far as the battle goes, it ends in a withdrawal. But we do need to talk about a few of the things that result from this battle and some of the realities of this battle as well. First and foremost, this changes the name of the game as far as naval warfare goes for the rest of the world. England at this point in time probably has the strongest navy in the world, and overnight it's made obsolete.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely obsolete. There is nothing that can stand up against these ironclads except ironclads.
Right.
That's like the machine gun. That's like the tank. Probably, though, on a much larger scale, to be quite honest. Because think about how vital navies are in full-on conventional warfare.
Right.
There's going to be other things that happen as a result of this. First and foremost, the Union is going to maintain control of Hampton Roads, that waterway. They're going to keep control of it. The two ships will be in ports, facing off against each other for quite a while after that, but they'll never face off again in a fight. So maintaining control of Hampton Road is also going to allow Major General George B. McClellan, who is the new commander of the Army of the Potomac, it's going to allow him to launch his Peninsula campaign. He's going to make a move for Richmond by marching down the Virginia Peninsula. Something that wouldn't have been able to happen if the Union forces had lost control of that waterway.
That's why we need a navy.
Exactly. Another thing to keep in mind from this battle is, although the second day was kind of a wash, for the most part, two ships firing back and forth without having really any effect on each other.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the day before that, it's quite a horrendous experience for the Union sailors the sailors and Marines that have to deal with facing off against an ironclad on board a wooden vessel. Just to put things into perspective for everybody, the USS Cumberland, that's the first ship that is sunk on the first day of fighting.
Yep.
It's going to have 121 out of 376 guys on board killed. And the other ship, the USS Congress, is going to have 120 out of 434 of their crew killed. It's 27%, man. So a combination of the two, on the first day, the Union's going to lose roughly 241 guys.
Yeah.
And the Confederacy's not even going to lose 20. They're going to have 2 killed in action and then roughly, maybe a dozen wounded.
Basically unopposed with numbers and stats like this because there's no comparison.
Well, the first day of battle will end up being the bloodiest naval battle, at least in American history up to that point. It'll actually stay that way until December 7th, 1941, when the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese takes place. It's not until that point that this battle is surpassed in cost.
That's a long time.
It is a long time. And to think about being these guys in these brand new instruments of warfare, they're super heavy. If you do get a hole in one of them, man, you're going to sink quick,
Right.
I can't imagine how loud it is being inside of those things with cannonballs bouncing off the side of it nonstop.
Well,
it's crazy to think about, man.
It's crazy to think about because it's like the people that are operating this thing also have never seen these things before. And it's like, well, get out there and do it. Sometimes you don't even know your own strength in your own body sometimes. Now you're operating a ship, just this monster of a thing, and it's just killing people.
Now, it's important to note, though, that neither of the ships, neither the Virginia nor the Monitor, would survive the war. Actually, in fact, they wouldn't even make it into 1863 that far. The Virginia is going to be blown up by its own crew. They do that to avoid it being captured by Union troops advancing onto Norfolk. and that's in May of 1862.
So the Virginia, the Merrimack, is going to be destroyed by its own again.
Yep, and this time it's successfully done so.
Yeah.
Now, the Monitor is going to have a different fate in store for it. It's actually going to sink in a storm off the Outer Banks there in North Carolina, and that'll be in December of 1862.
Yeah, so none of them survived the end of the war. That was it.
Now, I did see something where they just found or not too long ago, found the wreckage of the Monitor.
The Monitor, yeah.
Did you see that same thing?
I saw something about it, or I read something about it, but I didn't look into it.
Bro, how cool would it be to go see that in person?
That would be cool. I wonder how deep it is.
I'd be pretty jazzed, dude. I'd be pretty psyched.
I would love to go down there and see it.
Because especially if they can get it to one day, if they can recreate a portion of it to where you could kind of see inside of it and what it would have looked like and stuff. Like, dude, you know how they have this in Wilmington, the Navy ship they have there, the World War II era Navy ship they have in Wilmington. I think it's the USS North Carolina, right?
Yeah, yeah. They got the battleship New Jersey you can get into also.
Right. I love going into those things, man. I mean, it's so cool to walk through and see because it's such a different world than what you and I are used to. I know you've been on ship, but still, that was one experience out of the time you were in, and I've never been on a ship, so it definitely is outside of my realm of expertise or even my comfort zone. I just think it's really cool to see. So to be able to see that with the Monitor would be pretty awesome,
especially this day and age. Yeah,
right. But anyways, man, that pretty much brings us up to the end of this episode. It's been a good time talking about some naval warfare.
Yep.
Changing the naval game around the world with two ironclads facing off against each other, and looking forward to next time.
Yeah, looking forward to next time. And I want to say one last thing: the infantry, they got a good lick in there too.
They did. Well, they took out the commander of the Confederate ship. You gotta love that.
Yeah. So, but yeah,
I'll give them a raw. Raw boys.
That's right. So anyway, I'll catch you next time.
See you next time, guys. Stay frosty. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, make sure you never miss new ones by subscribing to the show on your podcast app of choice. And if you want to help us out with growing the show and enable us to bring you better content and more of it, then Brett and I ask you leave us a 5-star rating and a review. They really go a long way in helping us out. Stay up to date with everything from America Fog of War by connecting with us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. As always, Brett and I thank you for listening, and until next time, stay frosty.
Being a U.S. Marine and fighting for my country is one of the things in my life I am most proud of. Although there are so many positives that came from my experience in the Marine Corps, like many of you, I had another battle I had to fight when my service was done. It's no secret that PTSD affects many active duty and former servicemen and women every day, as well as their family members and the first responder community. If you or a family member is struggling with PTSD, Colby and I recommend looking into the Mighty Oaks Foundation for help in your battle with this condition. The Mighty Oaks Foundation is a faith-based veteran service organization that teaches combat veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress how to get beyond combat trauma and live their lives in the manner God intended. Many combat vets are unable to reintegrate back into civilian life, leaving their families to deal with the aftermath of broken homes and suicide at times. By aligning their lives to biblical principles, these warriors are able to lead their families, their communities, and our nation. Their mission is to serve and restore our nation's warriors and families who have endured hardship through their service to America, and to help them find a new life purpose through hope in Christ and their resiliency and peer-to-peer recovery programs. More than 4,000 alumni have participated in Mighty Oaks programs, as they maintain one of the highest success rates of any recovery program in preventing veteran suicide and divorce. In fact, their programs are so successful that they receive hundreds of active duty military on official orders each year. Additionally, through a proactive effort, Mighty Oaks has provided resiliency programs to over 150,000 active duty troops on military bases worldwide. Find more information on the Mighty Oaks Foundation by visiting americafogofwar.com and follow the link Mighty Oaks Foundation located in the menu at the top of the homepage. Never fight alone. Get some backup in your fight with PTSD today.